go out onto YouTube, now I've been researching the second sun phenomenon for years, and it's real. I've had very scientific Christian people on the radio show before, and they just debunk it. That's their thing. They like to debunk. Okay, fine, that's your gig. If you want to debunk, you be the great debunker. I wasn't born in a barn. Last time I checked, I actually have a birth certificate, and I got a scientific background myself. And it's electronics engineering. And I've been researching these things and studying these photographs. I know what a camera, lens flare is. I get it. Okay, and all you have to do is type second sun on Google and look at, not all the pictures are not necessarily legit, but just look at the body of information that's out there. It's unbelievable, and what's fascinating is the second sun pictures. Many of them are surprisingly similar to the image that they had in the movie Deep Impact. And I'm wondering, do you think it's possible, and it's okay if you think it's some other anomaly, who cares, but do you think it's possible that there's some kind of a relationship? Because, back in 2001, there weren't no second suns. Back in I was around. I have YouTube. I've been doing computers since 1983. I built an XT, a 8 megahertz XT on a carpet with a 40-watt lamp, doing a low-level format in 1985. I've been around. I get it. Okay, and I've studied this stuff, and back in 2003, 2004, 2005, there were no second suns. But then 2008, 2009, Shazam, they're all over the place. They're all over the place. And I'm like, what do you think? Just without going into the automatic, hey, I'm a scientist kind of a guy and I'm going to debunk it, because debunking is easy. Any NASA monkey can debunk. Okay, what are the second suns? What do you think they are? Is it related to, maybe in some way, to this phenomenon?
I have no idea. I suppose it could be part of it. Maybe there are large comets passing near the sun they don't want us to know about, or they're trying to, not to scare us. There might be stuff coming in that's dangerous to us they don't want us to see. Maybe it is a lens flare. Maybe it is Planet X. I really don't know. I haven't seen them, so I couldn't say. Problem is there are a lot of lens flare phenomena going on. It's difficult to see.
Yes.
Or it's a sun dog or something else. What's the sun dog and which one's Planet X? I don't have the equipment to tell the difference. And since I'm of the opinion that Planet X won't become visible from Earth until midway through the tribulation, I tend to ignore it because it doesn't fit into my worldview. I'm not saying I couldn't be wrong, but if it's there, it's interesting. But I think the way Jesus operates, it says the Lord will come suddenly to his temple. He doesn't kind of come bits and pieces. It doesn't, like it says in Matthew 24, when they say, look out, he's in a desert, or is he in a hidden place? No, he says, how does it go here? If any man say to you, lo, here is Christ, there believe it or not.
Yep.
Behold, he is in a desert. Behold, he is in a secret chamber. For as the lightning comes out of the east and shines to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. It's a big, obvious thing. Planet X is not going to be showing up in lens flare-like photos, this and that. It's going to be a big deal. It's going to be an in-your-face situation. This is a preliminary to a major, major battle. And so he's going to make it so it has maximum psychological impact. And that means not flirting around the edges of the sun. It's going to appear suddenly and gloriously.
Okay, I agree. So let me ask you this. I mean, because suddenly and gloriously is like, okay, Shazam, pow, pow, everybody goes, whoa! But could there be, I think I like your the possibility that you tossed out there, that these may be artifacts that are associated with other possibly debris or related objects associated with it, because I think that is highly plausible, and other people support that, by the way. The other thing I was wondering is, let me just think here. Oh yeah, do you perceive how do you see the Kuiper belt being, what's that a result of? Do you think that, and this is also linked back to the Professor Harrington thing. As you know, Harrington bought off on the whole deal that Planet X was ultimately we'll just call it a planetary object of some type that had, as they stated, 5 to 7 moons, rotating around it. Now, of course, there are other theories that suggest that instead of that being a planet with moons, in fact, it was a little bit bigger than that. It was actually truly a binary star that failed, and instead of moons, they were actually 5 to 7 planets that were moving around it, and that we are dealing with another solar system with a failed star moving into our solar system. And of course, if you do some research on the whole brown dwarf deal, you also discover that a brown dwarf, when it gets a brown dwarf, when it gets in the right proximity and heading away from the sun, it ionizes. It forms, ultimately a type of a tail, red iron oxide dust, which could be accounted for turning the oceans, red like blood, like it says in the trumpet judgments. So I don't know. I just throw that out there. But how do you feel about the Professor Harrington embracing the 5 to 7 moon theory thing
around Planet X?
Yeah.
Or I'm not sure. You had a question about the Kuiper belt. The Kuiper belt's still a theoretical belt. We haven't proven it. But it's based on the theory that the comets originate from a belt from outside of our solar system, which is occasionally perturbed by objects which throw comets into our solar system. And that explains why they have long periods which take them in and out of the solar system, because when they go back out, they're returning to their point of origin. My theory is that the point of origin of all comets was not the outer solar system. It was actually Earth itself as a result of the giant impact. When the giant impactor hit the Earth, it threw up a great deal of water into the atmosphere and actually into space. In fact, the asteroid belt, only a year or two ago, we found out there's a huge amount of water ice on the asteroid, which should not have happened according to, the hypothesis of how things are supposed to form. Water does not form that way. This can only happen as a result of an existing body of water being basically thrown into space. So that was kind of a proof that the Planet X giant impact theory that I put forward in my book, Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man, and the end of the age. And also I put forward there that the comets were actually formed from a lot of the water that was thrown up by the giant impactor, which also formed our seas and atmosphere. And also, as a result, a lot of the asteroids had a lot of water ice on them. And when Planet X passed on its way out of our solar system, it dragged some of them along with it. As it passed some of these outer planets, they added gravitational interactions which stripped away the comets and gave them independent orbits. And so that all comets and all asteroids, the great majority of them, originated from Earth, being struck by a giant impactor. And then the activity of Planet X moving in and out of our solar system and a long elliptical orbit created these long period comets and asteroids, because they're probably long period asteroids that we can't see because they're dark. So I do think the Kuiper belt theory is based on false premises, that the comets did in fact form outside of our solar system. I do believe they formed from the mantle of Earth as a result of the giant impact. And one major proof to my theory is, which harms that theory, is there was recently a probe called the Stardust probe that took samples from the comet of Vilta 2 a few years ago. And they wanted to see, their assumption, which was incorrect, that the comet had come from the outer solar system. And so they assumed incorrectly that the dust in the comet's tail would be comprised of elements from the outside of our solar system, and thereby we could determine the chemical composition, isotopic ratios, that sort of thing, of the elements outside of our solar system, and its theoretical Kuiper belt, which has never been proven. But when they actually got this material back, which they had this super sophisticated aerogel, which they used to collect dust in the comet's tail, They then, when they got this material back, they found that the chemical composition was not that of our solar system. It was actually identical to that object that had formed in the inner solar system. So this comet had actually formed in the inner solar system, proving the Planet X giant impact theory that comets originated not from outside the solar system, but from within the inner solar system, most likely from Earth, the only significant water-bearing planet.
Wow. Okay, so you definitely don't agree with the whole theory that there was another planet in this solar system that had come into some kind of great impact and busted into a whole bunch of little pieces.
No, the original impactor which struck Earth was actually still embedded to Earth to this day. In fact, if you look at plottings of Earth's core, it's actually slightly off center. This might be related to the Sheol buried into Earth referenced in the Bible. It might have to do with this impactor which is buried into the Earth itself. When it says in Job, Sheol was laid bare, and my interpretation of the Planet X interpretation, my interpretation of that when Job was talking about the Sheol being laid bare in the context of a creation event and a conflict, was that actually this is referring to Earth's mantle being opened up as a result of the giant impact, and the inner Earth, or Sheol, was revealed to the surface. You could actually see it because there was a huge hole that led all the way down to the mantle temporarily. This impactor remains in Earth's core to this day, but this impactor was a satellite, a former satellite of Planet X, which embedded itself inside of Earth. The Planet X itself remains intact. And so the original, the source of the impactor of Planet X remains intact, but the impactor itself is inside Planet Earth as we speak. And remnants of Earth can be seen floating in the asteroid belt and also in the comets and various asteroid groups like the Amors, Apollos, and Autans in the inner solar system. It could only be explained by that kind of activity. I do hold that Planet X is actually a rocky body, or possibly a heavy, like an ice and rock. I don't think it's a large gas planet, nor do I think it is a brown dwarf. I think it is actually just a pretty good sized planet, somewhere in size between, let's say, maybe about 3 to 5 times the size of Earth, maybe a little larger or smaller, I don't know. Rocky, or mostly or completely rocky, and surrounded by a series of substantially large satellites, similar in size to our moon. But it's actually a total of 11 large satellites. It may comprise of a group of 7, a group of 4, and a group of smaller satellites, 24 in number, corresponding with the 24 elders. And it also has a ring system, a gigantic tail which forms when it comes, or actually wings that forms when it comes close to the sun, and some other interesting features which I talk about in my book.
Wow. So, and one of the things you mentioned in the book was, the man in the moon concept with Job, and then the companions, or / the comments, and then also the echoes of the divine conflict of Job. Can you connect a couple of the Job dots for us? Because Job is just loaded with all kinds of mysteries.
Job was constantly talking about Leviathan and the battle between God and Rahab. Rahab and Leviathan Rahab's mentioned a couple of times. It's not always translated into the English text, but it occurs at least 2 or 3 times in the context of a creation, specifically creation battle. My basic theory that Job is actually the Hebrew equivalent of Babylonian creation epic, working on the same oral traditions that the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, drew from, but it was interpreted differently and formatted differently in the sense that it was actually a play. There was an opera that was sung. In fact, at the beginning of the book of Job, it says, God sung and said, and then Satan sung and said. When Satan appeared before him along with the other sons of God, they were actually singing to each other. So this is actually an opera, which is like the Greek plays or the poems. They were sung so they could be more easily remembered because there's a melody going along with these things. And it's much easier to remember the information if it's part of a song or like a play, because it has a logical order which can be reconstructed, and there's musical notes which will help remind you of certain words. The music itself might have special meanings that it's intended to achieve, like if you have a sudden, like a dramatic bass sound, it might mean something bad is about to happen. Whereas a high treble sound might mean, God is, something bringing His grace. There's a lot of stuff we've lost because we've lost the original information. The Psalms, we've lost the music for that too. I suspect it's probably hidden inside the Hebrew itself in a really clever way. So one of my many, many long list of projects is to try to figure out, do the Psalms have the notes, the musical notes hidden in them themselves somehow in the Hebrew? In fact, the Hebrew might be interpreted as notes itself. Do the letters of Hebrew actually have sounds and so forth? So, but basically, Job is basically, it's an opera. It was a constructed tale based on real events in a real person's life. Job was a man, a Hebrew, who was the richest man in the land of Sumer. He lived near the capital city of Ur, which would be Ur III, probably in existence, I think, around 2500 to 2000 BC, something like that. And the events of, I believe, that are timed by the beginning of both Enuma Elish and the book of Job. In the beginning of Enuma Elish, we have not one but two appearances of the gods in the heavens. But also in the book of Job, you have two appearances of these divine beings, not once but twice. Where these appearances of the sons of God got together, they gathered before God, and Satan was among them. This is actually a description of the planets in heaven. The sons of God, in a sense, are described as a metaphor used for the planets because they cannot use the names of the planets because they are deity names, and you can't use that in the Bible, so they use the generic term sons of God. And the fact that they appeared twice was interesting because I noted around 2000 BC to 1900 BC, that area, there were two massings of all of the planets in one quadrant of the sky. I think it was around this. The first one was like 1970 BC, and the ones around 1916, 1914 BC, something like that. And as a result, because of these massings of the planets are unique in history, in human history, it's only happened once like this. You can actually use these massings, these positions, these planets in one quadrant of the sky, to time the book of Job and also Enuma Elish, the writing of Enuma Elish, because since it was referencing the gods in the sky as having a kind of a congregation, the gods are having a congregation when they were talking to each other in the Babylonian creation epic, and the sons of God appear in assembly before God, also in the sky. I do believe that was a metaphor for a collection of planets in the sky, which was unusual. And therefore, the actual events of the book of Job, the near flyby of Planet X, happened sometime between 1900 and 2000 BC, based on that timing principle, probably sometime between 1950 and 1920 BC. And I wound up my original point, but Book of Job. So the Book of Job is basically a recitation of a reappearance of Planet X around 1900 to 2000 BC. And at that time, they decided to write down all the information, the oral traditions and so forth they had in circulation at that time and write them down into a comprehensive format. The Babylonians created the Enuma Elish around that time, and the Hebrews created Job around that time. Both different peoples taking their own oral traditions, and there was some crossover because Rahab and Leviathan are actually mentioned. Actually, Tiamat's not mentioned, so it wasn't crossover per se, but the idea of actual dragons being involved is mentioned. Rahab and her helpers are mentioned, and Job, Leviathan is mentioned a couple of times, at least once. The major passage of Leviathan describing him as being this great dragon-like creature. I actually think that chapter is actually a description of God's combat with the dragon. And when it's talking about breathing out fire out of his nose or his mouth, it's actually a reference to God breathing out fire, not the dragon, in his battle against the dragon. But I didn't have enough time and space to put that in the book, so I left it up for a future revised and expanded version if there was interest. But basically, I determined based on my analysis of Enuma Elish and Job, and others had done this before, other academic scholars had done this over 100 years ago, the primary among them being a man, I think his name was Sigmund Mowinckel. And there were others too, John Day and some other prominent academic authors in more recent times. John Day's classic God's Conflict with the Dragon and the Sea. That was highly influential on me too, and he basically went through how there was clear parallels between the book of various passages of including Job, a lot of stuff in Job. In fact, by far the most creation material specifically related to the name Elish is to be found in Job. And I realized, based on that, they were correct, and not only were they correct, they were underestimating the total material involved. As I dug deeper and deeper, I realized that the creation battle between God and the dragon was the core concept behind this entire thing. In fact, this was the Hebrew version of the Babylonian creation epic. The only real difference between it was the way the information was presented. The Babylonian creation epic, they presented in the form of a drama with the names of deities who were associated with the planets. And these deities had this dramatic interactions, and there was conflicts and combats between the gods and so forth. Much simpler format, actually, to understand than the more erudite but much more complicated, more literary, operatic format followed by, and they were both operas. Both the Babylonian and Israelite versions were both sung as part of their, probably as their New Year's festival. The both of them were probably sung at their respective New Year's festivals. And the Hebrew version, which of course was paralleled the Babylonian tradition, it was in the form of like an intellectual discussion between Job, his friends, and finally God, saying, "Why is this happening to me? Why was I cursed the day I was born? Why did the dragon fight against God?" That sort of thing. And it was strangely interrelated with these references to the dragon and its creation battle. And it doesn't make sense unless you realize in its context, this is a book of its time. This was a book written in the context of ancient times, in the context of the Daily Elish. It fits in perfectly with the dominant ancient Near Eastern thought pattern at that time, where the creation of the earth was, the earth was thought of being the head of a dragon, which had been cut off by a divine being that appeared in heaven as a gigantic flaming bright star. It struck earth with one or more of its weapons, divided it into two pieces. One became heaven, one became earth. And that is the current situation. We're in a situation right now where we're literally living on the head of this dragon, which had been cut off from the rest of its body, and then its tail had been twisted into a great circle of stone in heaven, Akkadian Rakas, which corresponds not only conceptually but also it's also cognate to the Hebrew word rakia, which is the word we use for firmament. So when you see the word firmament, which was incorrectly translated as these hardened bronze plates that formed this shell of a universe in which we live in, like in this great sphere. What it actually says, the word rakia means something that is struck and beaten into small pieces and spread out, just like the asteroids were struck from a larger body and broken into small pieces and spread out in a circle in heaven, which is exactly what the Akkadian term rakas means. Rakas and rakia are cognate, they mean the same thing. Somehow something being bashed into small pieces and spread out is translated into like these bronze flattened out plates, which makes no sense. They're clearly talking about the asteroid belt there. So the dragon's tail was thought of this great circle of stones floating in heaven, which was one of the heavens. I believe it was the second heaven, two of the three heavens. And the earth was basically the majority of the dragon, really symbolically its head. And we were planted on earth in order to make sure that the dragon would never rise again. Our purpose on earth is to make sure the powers of evil are kept down and not allowed to rise again until the time of the end. And this goes into my larger theory that mankind was planted on earth along with animals and plants to be fruitful, multiply, to make sure that the power of the dragon was not allowed to rise again, that spiritual power. So when we spread across the earth, we had kind of this blanket of biomass that keeps the demons from rising again somehow. It's an interesting concept. I'll get into it in a future book. In fact, my next book in the Giants, I'm going to talk about that because it's kind of one of the core concepts of the Giants, is being these shades that are constantly being reborn from beings who died in the world before the flood. They're trying to come back and re-inhabit these bodies of these newborn giants that were specifically designed to be for them to incarnate into. That's another subject.
So, if you don't mind sharing with people, what is the
Sure.
what do you think the name of your next book is going to be?
I don't want to give the name yet because I don't want people to copycat. But it's nearly done now. I've been saying that for a while. I understand. I apologize, but I've come to the point where I can actually finish it up now. I'll probably have it out. I'll probably have it out by next summer, and so just in time for the tribulation to start. So get your seatbelts fastened. Yeah, get your seatbelts fastened, and you have all the information at your fingertips. You know, why is this all happening? Blah blah blah. Honestly, my honest answer to that is, why I sent it out is because I was moving so fast that God put the brakes on me. I was unleashing too much too quickly. I was getting too deep, too far to the point where I might release information that could actually cause a problem. And so I was basically the brakes were put on, and I was told to stop for years.
Oh wow!
And I'm only just now getting back to the point where I'm able to finish it. Not only in terms of time, but also emotionally and energy. I just had no energy. I was so busy with work and other stuff and promoting Planet X and all the rest, having a life, that the amount of energy required, which is a substantial amount, because the dragon's a very powerful adversary, and he's very, very against me writing this book because it contains his major secrets. This will come out only when God wants to come out and not before. So I apologize, but what God wants, God gets. It's his book. I'm just writing it. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true. So it'll come out when it comes out. When it needs to come out, we can be satisfied with that.
Now, some people out there, Bob Fletcher is one of them. You've probably heard of him. Other folks as well believe that, and there's probably some truth to it. I would expect that part of the I don't know, for lack of a better term, forces of darkness agenda to topple down a wide variety, if not the vast majority of the developed countries and put them under a control grid, e.g. martial law. A big part of that is to have that control in place before this Planet X Nibiru manifestation becomes painfully obvious, whereby there would be mass global hysteria as a result of it. Do you see a connection between the whole martial law concept and the visible, hey, whoa, there it is, kind of Planet X thing?
Yeah, well, they're building up for the final conflict. It's the forces of the dragon arraying themselves in a final last stand against the forces of Christ. In my opinion, there's been an ongoing battle for thousands, I don't know, maybe millions of years, in which the forces of Satan, which once sprung amok in the universe, have been cornered finally in this part of this solar system. I suspect the only areas of the universe that they still control to any extent, probably only from the asteroid belt on inwards to the sun. I'm not sure if they truly control it; they just have a strong influence. But I do think that the final battle involved them. In fact, it'll be the last century. Has been involved with the cleaning up of the inner solar system. That's why we have all these aliens crashed into the Earth and Roswell, all this stuff, because they're being defeated and thrown down to Earth, cornered and captured and limited to Earth specifically, where they're going to make their last stand.
You believe? Do you believe? I mean, I'm going to admit it. I do believe that this is true, but I'm not going to corner you to agree with me because it's very controversial. But do you believe the wars in the heavens are literal?
Yeah, there's literal physical objects, craft being used to attack each other.
Yeah,
there's a spiritual
I agree too.
Naturally, but
you
have to, in order to move physical objects, you have to have physical forces. I mean,
so even if you're a spiritual being,
to move,
So what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, keep me sane,
keep
me honest, but you believe that even though you might be a spiritual being, in order to interact in a war capacity with these fallen beings, you may have to, leverage similar technologies to affect a war against them as a spiritual being, perhaps.
I do think that, and for example, the Merkava craft that shows up in Ezekiel, might actually be an actual physical craft.
Mm-hmm.
What we call a spacecraft that's used to travel between various points in the heavens, perhaps to Planet X and back. Who can watch can speculate. And that there's at least 7 of these currently patrolling the Earth, what I'm calling battle carriers, these kind of huge ships, capital ships, which not only have a main weapon, but also carry smaller ships. And I'm actually, as for my final book on the Book of Revelation, I'm going to provide some information on my theory that the Hebrew monetary system and the Ark of the Covenant at the top of the system is actually modeled after this, for lack of a better term, space fleet. All these various types of saucer-like craft, all the way from the sports model all the way up to these huge aircraft carrier type deals, which what the Merkava was, which are used to transport people. There's an entire fleet which has been in operation this entire time invisibly, and we haven't been able to see it, except for occasionally when they make themselves visible, as it happened with Elijah, where we saw one of these things, maybe several, come down and pick him up and take him off. I mean, it was a chariot. I mean, it's not going to be a literal chariot with horses. It's silly.
Right.
And once you get out of the atmosphere, you're going to die. You have to have an enclosed craft, which can take you at rapid speeds, and that's basically what a spacecraft is. It's not rocket science. In fact, well, maybe it is, but when it's
well said.
Yes, but I should really stop using that metaphor because I always use it incorrectly, but or ironically. But when Lucifer fell from heaven, and the people say, the translation is he was actually in a coffin covered with worms or something. The word there is nebel, which means bottle, and when it's used in the context of transporting a human, it's translated as vessel. So he was in an enclosed vessel, which was traveling from heaven to earth, covered with these worm-like entities. And you've probably heard of angel hair. You ever heard of that? As associated with UFOs?
Oh yeah, I think so. Well, tell me what you know.
Angel hair is basically this long, sticky substance like spider webs that are occasionally released by UFOs. It's been noticed since the 1950s. It might be that they were talking about this. And part of my theory is that Satan's primary weapon is actually a nanotechnology, known in the Bible as Tsarat, which is a self-replicating nanobot, which
like the stuff that they have in the chemtrails, like the guys that have more gallons when you zero in. Yeah, yes, I agree.
More gallons, yes. More gallons may be the same or something similar. And so his main weapon is to undermine, and this more gallons, it appears like a small red worm or snake. And it is, in fact, the snake of the garden mentioned in Genesis 3. And it also appears in Exodus as a small red worm, which appears from the ground every morning and devours the manna. And it also is known as the Megafa, or the disease of Egypt, is associated with the Tsarat. This is the major plague which will reappear in the end times, and appears every time the fallen angels are on earth, because it's one of their primary tools they use to enslave mankind. I'll give you my short and sweet wacko theory on what that is, basically. It's a nanotechnology which, self-replicating, spreads out everywhere, goes on the ground, and enters in through animals and humans in through the foot. Infests their body, creates a network of fibers, which allows, with the implantation of a chip, for the host to be remote controlled. Basically, they lose control of their entire body. The inner network acts as a second nervous system, which takes over control, actually sends chemical or electrical impulses to the muscles, so it could actually be used to move the person around by making the muscles move. Yep. And if they attempt to resist, pain compliance is used, and if they cooperate, pleasure compliance is used. So I do believe in the end times, the end time Armageddon, indeed, everyone who has the mark of the beast will have literally lost control of their bodies.
Yes.
They will be centrally controlled by a computer, which by satellite or maybe by health waves will be able to communicate with these networked bodies, which also this inner network acts as an antenna, which can pick up ultra low frequency or extra long frequency, because it requires an antenna about a mile long to get those.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an antenna stretched out in a mile. It can be an antenna that's wrapped around
Circle.
the inside
Yeah.
of a body for a mile or miles.
Yep.
And so you have 1 mile or a couple miles of antenna inside of you. That is used to pick up the signal. The signal then goes to the chip to be processed. Its orders go on the chip. Signals are sent to the muscles. Then the person does whatever the computer wants them to do. So whoever gets the chip, the mark of the beast, is saying, I am going to join the army of the beast in this fight against God's son, Jesus. And that is why they're going to hell, because they have made the decision to join the war against God.
Yes, I would even submit. I agree with everything you said. I would even submit it is that they are unsalvageable, and almost like the Canaanites were. Why God had to go in and slaughter men, women, and children, and even the animals, because they were all in part of that whole demon seed that came from the infestation of the fallen sons of God. And that whole Nephilim deal. But anyway,
not just that, but
go ahead.
they may have actually been infested by the Zerat back then too. Because I do believe it was actually active at that time as well. And it's one of the reasons the Israelites were raised up, was to go around and destroy all of it with the use of the ark.
Yes. And since we're throwing wacky theories out there, I'll throw one out there. Here's my theory. In Revelation 12, verse 14, where it says, "But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for times, half a time, which is the length of great tribulation, away from the presence of the serpent." I have a theory. I think that great eagle is a technology, just like Ezekiel's wheel. I think it's a ship of some kind, possibly like Ezekiel's wheel, like a symbiotic craft of some type, and the name of that ship is the Eagle. But anyway, that's just me. I'm crazy like that.
That's interesting. It's an interesting idea. It could be true. I don't know.
Yeah, well, when I saw when I was like Ezekiel's wheel, symbiotic spacecraft, all that kind of stuff, I started connecting the dots. I was like, hey, because God.
Where do you get symbiotic?
A symbiotic just simply means it's made up of living creatures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because
living creatures says, I got you.
Yeah, for example, when you look at the movie Prometheus, where you have that concept of the Anunnaki having to have their neurological system merge with the chair, and when their neurological system came up with a proper match to the chair, why the ship would respond to their commands, because there was a symbiotic match between the biology of the Anunnaki and the spacecraft itself, type of symbiotic craft. And then you have, if you go out and you search on David Adair, David, D-A-V-I-D, Adair, A-D-A-I-R. David Adair was a child prodigy. At the age of 17, won this humongous science foundation thing for creating rocket engines. So significant it was that he was actually taken by some senior military officials to Dulce and given a tour at that very young age, and they took him down into a lower level where they had captured a craft, and they asked him, because they knew he was a prodigy, child genius. They said, "Would you please go inside this craft and tell us what you think about it?" Because they could not recover the engine. They wanted to know how to make the engine work, and so Adair went in, and he's examining the engine, and he thought to himself, I wonder, and he put both of his hands down on the top of the engine of the craft, and that craft alive. The engine actually activated from his hands being on it, and I was like, that's it. That's symbiotic technology, where it's actually living biological technology, similar to what seems to be described in Ezekiel's wheel.
And it is described in other accounts of UFOs where there seems to be very little difference between the UFO and the occupants themselves.
Right.
They fit them like a glove. And I have told you the theory that in the last battle, when we're converted to spirits, angelic beings, we'll actually be given craft that are custom tailored to meet our needs and are more specifically what Jesus wants us to be accomplishing. And so we're actually not just coming back in literal horses, we're actually coming back in fighter craft of some kind that he's created for that purpose.
I agree. I know. It's so exciting. This is awesome. Praise God. I love the last 20 minutes of this conversation. It was the best ever. Praise Jesus. That's exciting. This is it. This is what God, wants us to do. He wants us to be amazed with his creation, to look at the Bible through a clean set of eyes with the understanding that we have today instead of the understanding that they had 2, 3, 4,000 years ago, and reevaluate the word and say, hey, maybe this is bigger than we've been thinking. Maybe those locusts aren't helicopters like Jack Van Impe thought in 1970. Praise Jesus. So anyway, could you close with a prayer for us tonight?
Sure. Lord Jesus, thank you for the opportunity to appear on Tribulation Now show with John Baptist and all the wonderful people who you have blessed and motivated to work on this show and bring forward your truth and speculations about the wonders of your word and about the future glories that you have waiting for us. Please enlighten the audience and give them insight and special knowledge of your word as a result of this show and of their own studies. Indwell them with the Holy Spirit, and those who are listening who are not saved yet, please give them an encouragement and indwell them with your Holy Spirit as well, so they may be saved from the evil times that are coming. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
You go out onto YouTube. Now I've been researching the second sun phenomenon for years, and it's real. I've had very scientific Christian people on the radio show before, and they just debunk it. That's their thing. They like to debunk. Okay, fine, that's your gig. If you want to debunk, you be the great debunker. I wasn't born in a barn. Last time I checked, I actually have a birth certificate, and I got a scientific background myself. And it's electronics engineering. And I've been researching these things and studying these photographs. I know what a camera, lens flare is. I get it. Okay, and all you have to do is type second sun on Google and look at, not all the pictures are not necessarily legit, but just look at the body of information that's out there. It's unbelievable, and what's fascinating.
Matthew 24. When I say look out, he's in the desert, or is he in a hidden place? No, he says, how does it go here? If any man say to you, lo, here is Christ, there believe it or not.
Yep.
Behold, he is in a desert. Behold, he is in a secret chamber. For as the lightning comes out of the east and shines to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. It's a big, obvious thing. Platinum X is not going to be showing up in lens flare-like photos, this and that. It's going to be a big deal. It's going to be an in-your-face situation. This is a preliminary to a major, major battle. And so he's going to make it so it has maximum psychological impact. And that means not flirting around the edges of the sun. It's going to appear suddenly and gloriously.
Okay, I agree. So let me ask you this. I mean, because suddenly and gloriously is like, okay, Shazam, pow, pow, everybody goes, whoa! But could there be, I think I like your the possibility that you tossed out there that these may be artifacts that are associated with is this the second sun pictures. Many of them are surprisingly similar to the image that they had in the movie Deep Impact. And I'm wondering, do you think it's possible, and it's okay if you think it's some other anomaly, who cares, but do you think it's possible that there's some kind of a relationship? Because, back in 2001, there weren't no second suns. Back in, I was around. I have YouTube. I've been doing computers since 1983. I built an XT, a 8 megahertz XT on a carpet with a 40-watt lamp, doing a low-level format in 1985. I've been around. I get it. Okay, and I've studied this stuff, and back in 2003, 2004, 2005, there were no second suns. But then 2008, 2009, Shazam, they're all over the place. They're all over the place. And I'm like, what do you think? You know, just without going into the automatic, hey, I'm a scientist kind of a guy and I'm going to debunk it, because debunking is easy. Any NASA monkey can debunk. Okay, what are the second suns? What do you think they are? Is it related to, maybe in some way, to this phenomenon?
You know, I have no idea. I suppose it could be part of it. Maybe there are large comets passing near the sun they don't want us to know about, or they're trying to, you know, not to scare us. There might be stuff coming in that's dangerous to us they don't want us to see. Maybe it is a lens flare. Maybe it is Planet X. I really don't know. I haven't seen them, so I couldn't say. Problem is there are a lot of lens flare phenomena going on. It's difficult to see.
Yes.
Or it's a sun dog or something else. What's the sun dog and which one's Planet X? I don't have the equipment to tell the difference. And since I'm of the opinion that Planet X won't become visible from Earth until midway through the tribulation, I tend to ignore it because it doesn't fit into my worldview. I'm not saying I couldn't be wrong, but if it's there, it's interesting. But I think the way Jesus operates, it says the Lord will come suddenly to his temple. He doesn't kind of come bits and pieces, just like it says in
other possibly debris or related objects associated with it, because I think that is highly plausible, and other people support that, by the way. The other thing I was wondering is, let me just think here. Oh yeah, do you perceive how do you see the Kuiper Belt being, you know, what's that a result of? Do you think that, and this is also linked back to the Professor Harrington thing. As you know, Harrington bought off on the whole deal that Planet X was ultimately we'll just call it a planetary object of some type that had, as they stated, 5 to 7 moons, rotating around it. Now, of course, there are other theories that suggest that instead of that being a planet with moons, in fact, it was a little bit bigger than that. It was actually truly a binary star that failed, and instead of moons, they were actually 5 to 7 planets that were moving